"Dad, you signed it yourself. Nobody forced you." That's what my son Marcus said to me, standing in the kitchen of the house I built, with my own 2 hands in 1989. The same week he moved me into his guest room and told me it was temporary. My name is Raymond Pruitt. I'm 68 years old. I spent 40 years pouring concrete and framing houses across 3 counties in Ohio. For 40 years, I never once doubted that the people closest to me were telling me the truth. That kind of trust doesn't break all at once. It gets taken from you one quiet piece at a time, so slowly you don't notice the floor is gone until you're already falling. There's something strange I have to tell you before we go any further, because none of this makes sense without it. 3 weeks before any of this started, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway at 6:47 in the morning. An old man sat behind the wheel for almost 10 minutes without getting out, like he was working up the courage. I watched him from the kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I remember thinking, I don't know this man, and somehow he knows me. I didn't learn who he was or what he'd already figured out about my own family until almost 2 months later. By then it was nearly too late to matter. Stay with me until the end. And drop the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to know how far this has reached. 3 things you need to know before this gets worse. First, I built that house myself, board by board, on a half-acre lot off Route 9. Paid it off in full 11 years ago. No mortgage, no liens. Just my name on the deed. Second, when my wife Carol passed 4 years ago from a stroke that took her in 11 days, I gave Marcos power of attorney. Not because I was sick or confused. I gave it to him because grief makes you want one less thing to carry. Because he was my son, and a man doesn't expect to need protection from his own son. Third, 6 months ago, Marcus sat across from me at that same kitchen table. The one Carol and I bought secondhand in 1991, and never replaced because of the scratch on the corner where our daughter used to do her homework. He told me the roof needed work. The property taxes had gone up again. It would be smarter, he said, safer for everyone if I simplified things by transferring the house into a family trust he'd already had drawn up. He brought the papers over on a Sunday, right after church, still in his good shirt. Made coffee the way Carol used to make it, which I noticed and didn't think anything of. Slid the folder across the table and said, "Dad, I just don't want you carrying all this by yourself anymore." I felt taken care of in that moment. I felt grateful. That's the part that still gets me. Not that I signed something I shouldn't have. The moment it happened felt like one of the kindest things my son had done for me in years. I should say this too, because it matters for everything that comes after. Marcus wasn't always capable of this, or I didn't think he was. He coached his daughter's softball team for 6 years. The year Carol was sick, he drove 3 hours each way every other weekend just to sit with her, so I wouldn't have to choose between a paycheck and my wife. People who do terrible things are rarely cartoons. Most of the time, right up until the moment they aren't, they're people who loved you in ways that felt completely real. I think about Carol a lot when I tell this part of the story, because she was the one who would have caught it. She kept the books for our small framing business for almost 30 years, line by line. In a ledger she trusted more than any software Marcus ever tried to get her to switch to. She used to say that money problems always announce themselves quietly first. A small discrepancy here, a missing receipt there, long before they ever show up loud. I think if she'd lived to see that folder land on our kitchen table, she'd have asked Marcus 3 questions before I ever got the pen near the paper. I didn't ask any. I think that's the piece of this whole story that still sits heaviest with me. More than the money, more than the betrayal itself. I didn't ask because some part of me had stopped needing to ask anyone and anything once she was gone. Trust, once you've spent decades sharing it with one person, doesn't know how to function alone. It just looks for the next nearest hand to rest in. I signed the trust without reading every page. I trusted my own son's handwriting on a cover letter more than I questioned 30 pages of legal language. From the inside, that's what trust looks like. Right up until somebody decides to use it against you. 6 weeks later, he told me I was a burden. The first sign was small. The worst things always start small. I came downstairs one Saturday and Carol's writing desk was gone from the living room. The one she used every evening for 26 years. The one with the chipped left drawer she never let me fix because she said it had character. In its place was an empty stretch of carpet with 4 faint indentations where the legs used to sit. "It's in storage," Marcus said, not looking up from his phone. "Just for now, while we repaint." I stood there a moment too long. I didn't say anything. It would have been easy to make it a fight right there, and a fight is exactly what would have cost me everything faster than anything else could have. So that afternoon I drove to the hardware store and bought a small spiral notebook for $1.29. That night, alone at the kitchen table, I wrote the date and 4 words. Carol's desk. Storage. Why? Marcus had already filed paperwork with the county recorder 2 weeks earlier. I had no idea. The desk wasn't the beginning of anything. It was only the first thing I happened to notice. Let me walk through that Saturday a little slower, because the small details stayed with me. My coffee, 2 sugars, black otherwise. The same stairs I'd walked down for 35 years. The 4 indentations in the carpet, the only proof the desk had ever existed there at all. Renee passed through with a laundry basket and said, "Oh, did Marcus tell you? We're moving some things around." Same tone you'd use for the weather. Nobody asked if I minded. Nobody asked me anything. I called the moving company myself 2 days later, quietly, under the pretense of asking about a different job, just to confirm a storage unit had actually been rented in our name. It had. A small unit, climate-controlled, paid in advance for 6 months. I didn't say anything to Marcus about the call. I just wrote the unit number down in the notebook, next to the date, and went back to making dinner like nothing had happened. The way you learn to do when you've decided to watch, instead of react. Then came the bedroom. Marcus and Renee sat me down one evening. They actually used that phrase, sat me down, like I was a child hearing about a move to a new school. The master bedroom got better morning light for Renee's home office equipment, the ring lights and the laptop stand, and the tripod for her online boutique. Could I move into the guest room, they asked, just until things settle. All right, I said. I carried 1 photograph of Carol into that room myself, from our trip to the Smokies in 2009. Set it on the nightstand. Slid the notebook underneath between the lamp base and the frame, where nobody would think to look. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself a lot of things that month that turned out not to be true. Renee redecorated the master bedroom within 9 days. New paint, new curtains, a new bed frame delivered on a Tuesday. You don't redecorate a room you think is temporary. You redecorate a room you've already decided is yours. I remember standing in the hallway the day the bed frame arrived, watching 2 delivery men carry pieces past me like I was furniture myself, something to step around. Marcus came out of the kitchen, saw me standing there and said, "You good, Dad?" Not "I'm sorry about this." Not "this is temporary, I promise." Just, "You good?" The way you'd check on a stranger blocking a doorway. I said I was fine. There's a moment from that 9th week I haven't mentioned yet. The night before I left for Denise's, I walked through the house room by room. The way you do when some part of you suspects you might not come back the way you left. I stood longest in the kitchen, looking at that scratched second-hand table, every meal that had happened across it, every report card signed there. I didn't take anything with me. I just stood there a while, memorizing it. By the 9th week, Renee told me, gently, kindly, in the exact tone you'd use to tell someone bad news about a sick pet, that they'd already booked a renovation crew. "It would be easier for everybody," she said, "if I stayed with my daughter Denise for a few weeks. Peak season for contractors, hard to schedule otherwise." I nodded. I packed 2 suitcases, On my way out, I found, half buried under a tarp in the garage, a box of Carol's gardening tools. I hadn't given anyone permission to move either. I sat in my truck in the driveway a long time before I pulled away. Not angry, not yet. Something closer to vertigo. The ground under a house I built myself had shifted while I was sleeping in a different room of it. That night, on Denise's pull-out couch, I wrote 2 lines in the notebook. 6 weeks. House gone. Said nothing. I should mention Denise's house that month too, because it became its own kind of refuge. She kept the spare room ready without making a production of it. An extra toothbrush already in the bathroom drawer before I'd even asked. Like she'd known for a while that something like this might happen and had quietly prepared for it without telling me. Her kids, my grandkids, treated my staying over like an extended sleepover rather than a crisis, which helped more than I expected. There's a particular kindness in a 7-year-old, asking you to read the same book 3 times in a row, completely unaware that her grandfather is in the middle of losing everything he built. What I didn't tell Denise that first night was that I'd started a second list in the back of that notebook. Not events this time. Dates. Every single date something had been moved, changed, or decided without me. When I finally counted them up, weeks later there were 11 separate entries across 4 months. 11 times the ground had shifted before I'd ever heard the word trust. Carelessness doesn't happen 11 times in a row, all pointing the same direction. Comment below if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely. I read every single one, and I want to know I'm not the only one who's lived through something like this. 2 days after I moved in with Denise, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Kentucky area code. I let it go to voicemail, 11 seconds long. A man's voice, slow and careful. "Mr. Pruitt, my name doesn't matter yet. I'll call again when it does." I played that message back 4 times that week. No idea what to make of it. No idea it was the same man who'd sat in my driveway, weeks earlier, hands on the wheel. That same week, I called the one person who always answers. My daughter Denise, second ring every time. 10 minutes into explaining what had happened, the desk, the bedroom, the suitcases, she went quiet in a way that scared me more than anything Marcus had said. "Dad," she finally said. Marcus told me 8 months ago the roof was fine. He had it inspected for a listing. A listing. I hadn't mentioned a listing. Nobody had said that word to me at all. I lay on Denise's pull-out couch that night, staring at the ceiling, running back through every Sunday dinner, every phone call, every casual mention of the renovation over the past 2 months, trying to figure out how many of those conversations had actually been about something else entirely. A sale, a closing date, a buyer I'd never met. All of it happening in plain sight while I nodded along, thinking he meant new gutters. Denise called back the next morning with a name. A forensic accountant she'd found through a coworker, a woman named Priya Desai, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing. Family financial disputes, elder fraud, cases where the betrayal hides inside paperwork instead of a weapon. I called Priya that afternoon. She answered on the first ring. Before she asked a single question about money, property, or paperwork, she asked, "Mr. Pruitt, before we talk numbers, tell me how you're sleeping." Not the question accountants usually open with. It told me, in about 4 seconds, that I'd called the right person. Investigation 1330. Priya didn't move fast. At first, that frustrated me more than I expected. I wanted answers immediately. She told me something on our second call that I've carried with me since. The people who do this kind of thing count on the victim panicking and confronting too early. Patience is the only advantage you have left. Don't spend it. So I waited, and she worked. The first week she pulled the county recorder's records, public documents, nothing illegal about looking. What she found made my hands go cold reading the email she sent. A family trust filed in March, 4 months before Marcus ever mentioned simplifying things. The cover sheet listed Marcus as sole trustee. My name appeared once, buried on page 19, granting limited beneficiary interest. Legal language, Priya explained, for almost nothing at all. I read that email at Denise's kitchen table at 11 at night, after everyone else was asleep. I made myself read it 3 times before I let myself feel anything. First time, like a man checking a bank statement. Second time, doing the math on dates in my head. March. He was still bringing me coffee on Sundays then, still calling me the old man with affection instead of the way it would start to sound later. Third time, I just sat there with my hand over my mouth. 4 months meant he'd been planning this while I was still grieving Carol in front of him. While he was still hugging me at her grave. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 2 in the morning, I went outside onto Denise's back porch, in just a flannel shirt, no jacket, and sat there in the cold for almost an hour, without really thinking about anything specific, just letting the numbers sit. 4 months. I kept doing the arithmetic backward, trying to land on a date that made sense, a fight we'd had, a moment where something between us had shifted that would explain why he'd started this. I never found one. As far as I could tell, nothing had happened. He had simply decided, on an ordinary day I couldn't identify, that this was something he was willing to do. The second week, the realtor contract, signed in April, under the trust's name, not mine. The listing agent's notes, pulled from a public MLS history cache, described the house as motivated seller, quick, close, requested, owner relocating to assisted living. I am not in assisted living. Nobody asked if I wanted to relocate anywhere. Somebody had typed those words about me, a sentence describing a life I didn't have, submitted to a database where strangers in Cincinnati would read it and believe it without question. There's something particularly cold about being erased in writing while you're still alive to read it yourself. The third week was the hardest one. A pending sale. 11 days from closing. A young couple out of Cincinnati, paying full asking price, completely unaware that anything about the sale was anything but ordinary. They weren't villains here. Just 2 people buying a house, the same way I once did, with no reason to question the name on the paperwork in front of them. I found myself worrying about them almost as much as I worried about myself. They had no idea they were 11 days from closing on a house that wasn't legally available to sell. Priya sent me their names that week, along with a short note. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you should know there's more at stake here than your own house. 2 more people are about to walk into a problem they didn't create. I looked up the buyers online that night, more out of restlessness than anything practical. A young couple, a baby due in the fall according to a public registry post Priya had flagged. I thought about my own first house with Carol, the registry gifts, the nursery we'd painted yellow because we didn't know yet whether we were having a boy or a girl. It made the whole thing feel less like a crime against me personally, and more like a crime against something larger. The ordinary trust 2 strangers place in a piece of paper with a notary stamp on it. I asked Priya the only question that mattered. What do we do next? Before she answered, she asked me to repeat the number back to her, slowly out loud. Strange request, I thought, until she explained. People in shock skip past the number, she said. They jump straight to feelings, which is natural. But I need you to hear it first, because the number is going to carry you through everything that comes next. So I said it, $1,247,000. Saying it in my own voice did something the email hadn't, made it real in a way numbers on a screen rarely are. We wait, Priya said. We build the full picture first. Move too early and your son calls this a misunderstanding. Hires a lawyer. Buries the paperwork so deep we spend 3 years in court instead of 3 months. There was a particular call with Priya that week I haven't mentioned. She asked me, almost as an aside, whether I'd ever been the one managing money in my marriage, or whether Carol had. I told her Carol handled most of it, the bills, the budgeting, while I handled the physical side of things, the house, the truck, anything that needed fixing with my hands. Priya was quiet for a second. That's common, she said. And it's exactly the kind of arrangement people like Marcus learn to exploit. Not because you're foolish, because you built your whole marriage around dividing labor and trusting the other half completely. He just became the other half without earning it. I didn't have anything to say back to that. I just sat with it for a while after we hung up. I thought about Carol, how she used to say patience isn't about waiting quietly. It's about waiting on purpose, with your eyes open the whole time. I agreed to wait. Waiting on purpose turned out to be one of the loneliest things a man can do. There's a night from that stretch I haven't told anyone about until now. About 2.5 weeks into the waiting, I drove out to the house alone, late, after Denise's family was asleep. Didn't go inside, just parked across the street, the way that old man must have parked weeks earlier, and watched the lights on in what used to be my living room. Renee moved past the window at one point, carrying something, laughing at something Marcus must have said. The porch light I'd installed 9 years ago still worked fine. The mailbox still had my name on it, faded gold letters Carol picked out from a hardware store catalog. Back when our names on that mailbox felt like the most ordinary thing in the world. I sat there almost 40 minutes without moving. The strangest kind of grief there is, grieving a house that's still standing, with people you love still inside it, while you sit in the dark like a stranger, casing the place. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street, and a porch light clicked on 2 doors down, and I started the truck and pulled away before anyone came outside to ask who I was, parked alone in the dark outside my own house. I drove back to Denise's that night, and didn't tell her where I'd been. It just hurt quietly instead of making my decisions for me. There was one Sunday dinner that month I keep coming back to. Marcus made his famous ribs, the ones Carol taught him to make when he was 16. Halfway through the meal, he squeezed my shoulder and said, "I know this has been a hard year, Dad. I'm glad you're letting us take some of the weight." I sat there chewing slowly, looking at my son's face, genuinely unable to tell whether I was looking at a man capable of what Priya's documents said, or whether grief and an old man's pride had twisted an ordinary family transition into something darker than it was. I went home that night and almost called Priya to tell her to stop. I didn't. I'm grateful now that I didn't. We knew the money was moving. We didn't yet know who else outside our small circle had seen any of it happen. That answer would come from the man with the Kentucky number. The same man who had sat in my driveway weeks before I'd ever heard the word trust. The second call came on a Tuesday, just past dawn, same hour as that first 11-second voicemail. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. "Mr. Pruitt," the voice said. Slow, careful, a little short of breath, like each sentence cost him something to produce. "My name is Walter Briggs. I was the presiding judge on your wife's brother's probate case. 11 years ago. You won't remember me well, I remember you very well." I didn't remember him at all. I told him so. He laughed softly, not offended. "Most people don't remember the judge," he said. "They remember the day." Walter Briggs is 91 years old. He served on the county bench for 31 years before retiring. The detail I'll never forget, the one that told me everything about the kind of man I was talking to, is that he kept a single peppermint candy in his shirt pocket every day on the bench. For the families who looked like they needed something sweeter than the news I was about to give them. He told me that unprompted, almost shy about it. I asked him somewhat foolishly how he'd remembered Carol's brother's case after 11 years, given how many cases a man sees across 3 decades on a bench. He laughed, a dry, papery sound. "You remember the ones you got right far less than you'd think, Mr. Pruitt. You remember the ones where you went home wondering if you missed something. Your wife's brother's case wasn't one of those, but something about her in the gallery that day, holding your hand through the whole proceeding. I remembered that. Some things just lodge." 2 months earlier, his great-nephew, a young real estate attorney in Cincinnati, mentioned a property trust filing over Sunday dinner that smelled wrong. A son listing a parent's paid-off home. No properly notarized consent form anywhere in the county system. Walter had seen that exact maneuver twice in his 31 years on the bench. Ruled against the son both times. The address stuck with him for reasons even he couldn't fully explain. He looked it up that same night. It was mine. I drove out to your house 3 weeks ago, Walter said. Sat in your driveway the better part of 10 minutes trying to decide if an old man showing up unannounced would help you or frighten you. Decided it would frighten you. Left. Told myself I'd find another way to reach you once I had something more than a feeling to offer. I asked what changed between that morning in my driveway and the voicemail 2 days after my move to Denise's. Simple, he said. His great-nephew had pulled the recorded notarization date and confirmed something had been falsified. Until then, all Walter had was instinct, and instinct wasn't something you handed a stranger as fact. Once a date on paper didn't match the notary's own registration records, instinct became something he could finally act on. Why call me now? I asked. Why not let your great-nephew handle this through proper channels? A long pause. Long enough I thought the call had dropped. 11 days ago I had a cardiac event, Walter said finally. I'm not a young man, Mr. Pruitt, and I've decided I'm not leaving this world knowing what I know and having said nothing about it. What Walter had, the attorney's name, the exact backdated notarization date, lined up almost perfectly with what Priya had already found. Attorney. Same week. A forged notarization stamp that, under magnification, hadn't even been registered to that attorney's office at the date it claimed. Why does this matter so much to you? I asked. You don't know me. Not really. Somebody has to be the one who calls, he said. Might as well be somebody who's already run out of time to wait for someone else to do it. Before we hung up, he told me one more thing almost as an afterthought. I'm not pretending this is purely conscience, Mr. Pruitt. 11 years ago, on your brother-in-law's case, I had doubts about my own ruling and let them go because the paperwork looked clean enough. I've thought about that case, more than I should have, all these years. Some part of me wanted one more chance to look at clean paperwork and not let it go so easily this time. I asked him what he'd been doing with himself in the years since he left the bench, mostly to fill the silence, not expecting much of an answer. He told me he'd taken up woodworking, badly, by his own admission, and that he'd built a birdhouse for nearly every grandchild he had, none of them structurally sound enough to actually hang outdoors. My wife keeps them all on a shelf in the garage, he said. She calls it the Hall of Shame. It was such an ordinary, almost silly detail to share in the middle of a conversation about fraud and forged documents that it stuck with me longer than almost anything else he told me that morning. It reminded me that the man on the other end of the line wasn't some kind of avenging angel. He was just an old man who'd decided, late in his life, that one more uncomfortable phone call was worth making. I called Priya the moment I hung up, and I could hear the shift in her voice when I gave her the attorney's name. Raymond, she said. First name by now. That closes the last gap I needed. Full report ready in 5 days. After that, this stops being something we're quietly building. It becomes something a judge has to look at, whether your son is ready or not. 5 strange days. I helped Denise's husband fix a fence post, took my granddaughter to a Saturday soccer game. Ordinary tasks that felt almost obscene in their normalcy, given what I knew was coming. Marcus called twice that week. Once just to chat about nothing. Once to ask, almost casually, whether I'd thought any more about maybe looking at some smaller places once the renovation wraps up. I stood in Denise's driveway holding the phone, looking up at a perfectly ordinary blue sky, thinking, you have no idea what's coming. I also spent part of those 5 days writing things down that had nothing to do with the case at all. Memories, mostly. The summer I taught Marcus to frame a doorway when he was 14. How proud he'd been when the level finally read true on the first try. A fishing trip when he was 9 where he caught nothing all day and refused to give up until well past dark. I don't know why I wrote those down during that particular week. I think some part of me needed somewhere to put the version of him I still loved, separate from the version I was about to watch get arrested, so the two wouldn't get tangled together permanently in my head. If you're hanging in there with me, drop a comment now and tell me what you think is about to happen. I'll read your guesses after this video. And trust me, most of you are about to be surprised. The morning it happened, I wasn't there for any of it. I'm grateful for that now, even though at the time it felt strange to be so far from the center of my own life unraveling. I was sitting in Denise's kitchen at 9:15 a.m., coffee gone lukewarm, when Priya's name lit up my phone. At 9:15, the closing on my house, 11 days out, paperwork already drawn, was formally suspended by court order. At 9:22, Marcus's attorney was served a subpoena for the full trust filing history. At 9:30, the notary who'd backdated my signature was already sitting across a table from two detectives, explaining badly why a stamp registered to her office in June had somehow been used on a document dated in March. Priya called twice more that morning to keep me updated. I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard in our 6 weeks together. Not excitement exactly. A kind of quiet satisfaction. The sound of a long, careful plan finally landing where it was supposed to. None of this worked because we were angry, Raymond, she said. It worked because we were patient longer than he expected anyone to be. Then, 4 words. It's done, Raymond. I handed the phone across the table to Denise, because I didn't trust my own voice yet. And she said, "Tell her thank you, for both of us." The deed was reinstated within 9 days. My name went back on a house I never should have lost it from in the first place. The same paperwork process Marcus once used to take it from me, now working in the opposite direction. I drove out there alone the first time before telling anyone else. The equipment shed stood untouched, the canning jars still on the shelf where Carol left them. Her garden, planted the spring before she passed, overgrown but alive, stubborn the way she always was. I found her writing desk in the garage under a moving blanket, dusty but whole, the chipped drawer exactly as she left it. I carried it back inside myself, piece by piece, and set it by the living room window, where the morning light hits. I walked through every room alone that afternoon, before letting anyone else come back with me. The master bedroom still had Renee's new paint and curtains. I stood in the doorway a long while deciding whether to repaint it right away, or leave it as a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything for good. I ended up leaving it exactly as it was for almost 6 months. I'm still not entirely sure why. Maybe some part of me needed to walk past that doorway every day and remember what almost happened, so I'd never again mistake comfort for safety. That night, sitting in the house for the first time in months, I wrote 4 words in the notebook: home, name, hers, mine. If you're still watching, this is the part no one expected. Not even me. Renee took a plea deal fairly quickly once the financial records went public. 14 months, $80,000 restitution, full cooperation against Marcus, and the notary in exchange for the reduced sentence. She wrote me a letter before sentencing. I read it twice, months apart. The second time I wrote back 4 sentences. Not forgiveness, just an answer. Some things deserve at least that much. The notary lost her license within a month. Now faces separate fraud charges of her own, unrelated to our case. After investigators started looking closely at her other filings, Marcus went to trial. He sat through 3 days of testimony, and from where I sat, I believe he still saw himself as a son who'd been managing things. Not a man on trial for taking his father's house out from under him while his father slept down the hall. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled, with a clock above the jury box that ticked loud enough to hear during the quiet stretches. I noticed it constantly during those 3 days. Watching it the way you watch a kettle, like staring might speed up whatever was coming. The judge was a woman named Patricia Cole, mid-50s, the kind of presence that made the whole room sit a little straighter the moment she walked in. Even before she said a word, the first day was almost entirely the prosecution laying out the paper trail. The trust filing, the realtor contract, the backdated notarization. A young prosecutor named Mr. Alvarez walked the jury through it on a projector screen. I watched their faces the whole time. Juror number 6, an older woman in a cardigan, leaned forward when the date discrepancy on the notary stamp came up. She wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. Somebody else sees it too, I remember thinking. I'm not crazy. This happened. During a recess that first day, I ran into the notary's lawyer in the hallway by the water fountain, completely by accident. He didn't recognize me at first. He made small talk for almost a full minute, complaining about the courthouse parking, before someone whispered who I was and his face changed. He apologized and walked off quickly. I didn't feel satisfaction watching him go. I felt something closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing how many ordinary, forgettable people had to make small, forgettable choices for something this large to happen to me. I testified on the second day, wearing the same flannel jacket I wore to Carol's funeral. It felt important to bring her into that room with me, even just as a piece of fabric. Mr. Alvarez walked me through it slowly, question by question, the desk disappearing first, then the bedroom, then the suitcases. The 11-second voicemail I almost didn't listen to. At one point, he asked what it felt like learning the appraised value of my own house from a phone call instead of from my own son. I had to stop a moment before answering. Saying it out loud in front of strangers made it real in a way it hadn't quite been before. He asked the question I wasn't expecting. Mr. Pruitt, at any point during those 6 weeks, did you confront your son directly? I said no. When he asked why not, I told the jury exactly what I'm telling you now. I was afraid that saying something too soon would cost me the only thing I had left. Time to find the truth before it disappeared along with everything else. Marcus's defense attorney cross-examined me for almost 40 minutes. Tried, gently at first and then less gently, to make the jury believe I'd misread ordinary family decisions as a conspiracy. That grieving fathers sometimes invent stories to feel less alone. It almost worked on me too, for about 10 seconds, until I remembered the email with the March filing date sitting in my inbox at home. One exchange from that cross-examination has stayed with me. He asked, "Isn't it true, Mr. Pruitt, that you yourself signed the trust documents voluntarily?" I said yes, that was true. He paused there, like the answer should have done more work than it did. I added without being asked, "I signed a contract for a new water heater once without reading every line too. That doesn't mean the man who sold it to me was honest about what was in it." A few jurors smiled briefly before catching themselves. I don't know if it changed anything legally. It felt like the first moment in that whole proceeding where I stopped feeling like evidence and started feeling like a person again. Walter Briggs testified by video on the third day, from a hospital bed in Lexington. His voice was thinner than it had been on the phone with me. An oxygen line ran just at the edge of the frame. But his eyes were just as steady as they must have been for 31 years on the bench. The courtroom went completely silent when he said, on record, looking straight into the camera, "I have sat on that bench for 31 years. I know what theft dressed up as paperwork looks like. I've ruled on it more times than I'd like to remember. This is one of the clearest cases of it I have ever seen." When the call ended, nobody moved for almost 5 seconds. I have never heard a room that quiet. The jury came back after 6 hours, guilty on all counts: forgery, elder financial fraud, theft by deception, 11 years. Full restitution of $1,247,000. I remember the exact second the foreman read "guilty" the first time. Denise's hand found mine under the table before I'd even fully processed the word. I didn't look at Marcus right away. I looked instead at the empty space on the bench, picturing Walter Briggs himself, 31 years of seeing exactly this kind of theft dressed up in paperwork. It felt, in that strange moment, like his ruling had reached this courtroom even from a hospital bed 2 states away. Judge Cole looked directly at Marcus before adjourning and said only this: "A son does not need a knife to take everything from his father. Sometimes all he needs is a pen and the safe assumptions that his father will never read closely enough to notice." Marcus didn't look back when they let him out. Denise took my hand under the table, and we sat there a moment longer after everyone else filed out. Neither of us said anything. Both of us, I think, trying to figure out what was supposed to come after a moment like that. The house is mine again. The light still comes in best through the kitchen window in the early morning, exactly like it always did. Like the house never noticed anything was wrong while I was gone. Carol's desk sits exactly where she left it, chip and all. I went to see Marcus once, about 4 months into his sentence, more out of habit than anything I could explain to Denise beforehand. We sat across from each other at a metal table, bolted to the floor. For the first 10 minutes, neither of us said much. Then he asked, "Do you hate me?" I told him the truth. I didn't know yet. Hate felt too simple a word for something this complicated. What I felt most days was closer to grief, for the boy I raised, who I'm not sure entirely exists anymore in the man across that table. He didn't say much after that. I'm not sure there was much left to say. Take a breath with me here, because this next part took me longer to sit with than anything else in this whole story. After Marcus was sentenced, I spent the first few weeks back in that house mostly in silence. Denise checked on me daily, sometimes just a text, sometimes a visit with the kids, so the house would have noise in it again for an afternoon. I didn't turn on the television much. I found myself sitting in the kitchen a lot, in the chair I always sat in, looking at the chair Marcus used to sit in across from me, empty now in a way that felt different from ordinary emptiness. I'm telling you this part slowly because it happened slowly. There was no single morning where I woke up and felt like myself again. It came back in pieces, the way the house itself came back to me, one room at a time. I still don't know if I've forgiven him. Some days I think forgiveness is like a house. You can rebuild it from the studs up if you really want to. But you'll always know exactly where the crack was, no matter how good the new paint looks. There's another version of this story I think about sometimes, late at night. I confront Marcus the day Carol's desk disappeared. I let the anger talk first. I demand answers in that kitchen instead of writing 4 words in a $1.29 notebook. In that version, he has time to cover his tracks, time to call it a misunderstanding, time to make me look like a confused old man making accusations he can't prove. In that version, I lose the house for good, and nobody ever finds out. And a 91-year-old man never gets the chance to make his second drive out to a stranger's driveway. What I had instead was patience I didn't know I was capable of. A daughter who picked up on the second ring every single time. An accountant who asked how I was sleeping before she ever asked about money. And an old man who decided that running out of time was finally a reason to speak up, not a reason to stay quiet a little longer. Walter and I still talk. Every few weeks, usually on a Sunday afternoon, short calls, 15 minutes or so, nothing dramatic. He asks about the garden. I ask about his health, and he always changes the subject within about 30 seconds, which tells me everything I need to know. He told me once he didn't consider what he did particularly brave. I just had less time left to be afraid than most people, he said. I think about that sentence more than almost anything else from this whole ordeal. Courage, it turns out, isn't always about being fearless. Sometimes it's just running out of reasons to keep waiting. If you're going through something like this right now, and I suspect some of you watching are, write it down. Just the date. Just the fact. Nothing more to start. You don't need to know yet what you're building toward. You just need to start writing, and let the rest of it find you the way it found me. I think about that small $1.29 notebook more than I expected to, all these months later. It still sits in the kitchen drawer closest to the back door, not because I need it anymore, but because I'm not ready to throw it away. Some objects earn a permanent place in a house just by being present during the worst of it. Carol's desk earned its spot by surviving 26 years of evenings. That notebook earned its spot by surviving 6 weeks that nearly cost me everything. The ending took me years to fully understand. I hope, in whatever way you need it, it gives you something too. This is my home. This is my name. And this time, nobody takes either one from me again without me reading every single line first. If this story gave you something, hit the like button and subscribe. More stories like this one are coming, and you don't want to miss them. Drop a comment, your city, one word, or tell me if you've ever been through something like this. I read every single one, and if someone in your life needs to hear this right now, just send it to them. No caption needed, they'll understand why.